Joining me now from New York is Jim Nolt. He's a senior fellow at the World Policy Institute. So, Jim, we know that both sides are still working through some of the big sticking points. What is your read into this latest round of talks happening right now in Washington?
Well, I think there is evidence that there's some degree of progress. There may be an agreement, or at least an agreement to extend the deadline. But I think the issues that they're grappling with are so complicated and so difficult to resolve that even if there is an agreement in the near term, there may be some time before we can see whether the agreement, any new agreement, is actually taking hold of the satisfaction of both sides.
And do you think because of that possibility, we could see just a stop on tariffs, all tariffs, any tariffs past March 1st?
Well, we've gotten mixed signals from President Trump on that. On the one hand, he said that tariffs might come off if there's an adequate agreement. On the other hand, he said he might keep the tariffs on even after an agreement. So it probably depends on the extent of the agreement, how many things they've been able to resolve. My own feeling is a little bit pessimistic because the complexity of the issues and also the difficulty in enforcing compliance with the issues, because many of them require very intrusive methods to make sure that the other side's actually complying, so it's often difficult to know, and there will certainly be disputes in the future no matter what is agreed to here.
What do you make of new reports that China may purchase billions more in U.S. agricultural products, even more corn and soybeans? And what would that add to the negotiating process that's taking place right now?
Well, this has been on the table for a long time. When the two sides exchanged notes in last May, there was also the promise from China to, in fact, purchase more in the liquefied natural gas, agricultural products, and electronics products. But the numbers that China was talking about in the near term were much smaller than what President Trump was thinking about. And I think it would be very hard, in fact, to increase purchases from the United States to the extent that Trump hopes.
We saw U.S. markets close down a bit on Thursday. Also reports that the S&P could be 11% higher if not for this trade war. So how significant would, and you just touched on it a few moments ago, would a sort of framework, an agreement, or a memorandum of understanding be to the markets? We know that the U.S. president is very watchful, very reactive to what's happening on Wall Street.
Yeah, it's clear that part of the reason we've had market volatility quite consistently in recent weeks is that because many companies are worried about the prospects of a U.S.-China trade war getting worse if the tariff increase that Trump threatens goes ahead either on March 1st or maybe after a 60-day delay for further negotiations. U.S.-China trade, of course, is so extensive and affects the inputs and supplies of many companies as well as their sales that any movement toward progress on this is often welcomed by the market with a big rally. On the other hand, any pessimistic sign and there's another drop of, sometimes hundreds of points. So it is something that the markets are very reactive to.
And we know that, Friday coming up very soon. The following Friday is that March 1st deadline. What are you hoping to see at the end of these talks here in Washington?
Well, there's so many areas. I think that the best we can hope for is that there'll be memoranda of understanding that give some guidelines as to how they'll move forward on it. I don't think that all the points can be resolved in such a short period of time. There'll probably just be a sketch or an outline of principles on which to move forward if there's an agreement by March 1st. If there's not an agreement by March 1st, but there's nonetheless been substantial progress, I think what we'll see is an agreement to extend, and certainly Trump has hinted that that's a possibility to extend perhaps 60 days. In part, the staff work required to go over all these issues in dispute is immense and requires a lot of work, so I can imagine that it might require delay.
All right, Jim Nolt in New York City. Thank you for joining us.